People think I cheated on Ben with his brother before he died, but that's not the worst part. I slept with Ben after his brother was already gone, and everyone assumes it was grief that drew us together. They have no idea I started it because I couldn't stand seeing him cry at the funeral, and now my entire life is cracking apart because of what happened next. The real reason I confessed about the pity sex is that Chloe, my best friend since 7th grade, found the engagement ring I'd been hiding, and she thinks I've been stringing Ben along for months while sleeping with someone else. But that's not even close to what actually happened, and if I'm being honest, I'm not sure which of us destroyed everything worse. My guilt started 9 months ago at Jake's funeral. Ben was leaning against the casket, his shoulders shaking, and I'd known him forever as Jake's younger brother, the quiet one who always tagged along to our high school parties. I kept thinking about how Jake and I had fought the night he died, how his last text to me was, "I can't do this anymore," and how I'd been too proud to call him back. When Ben looked up with those red-rimmed eyes, I felt this compulsion to fix something, anything. I told him we should get coffee, that he shouldn't be alone, and he nodded like I was offering him a lifeline. That's the moment I should have known I was building a house of cards. We started meeting every Tuesday and Thursday at this grimy diner where the coffee tastes like burnt regret. Ben would talk about Jake's laugh, the way he'd always order pancakes at 2 a.m., and I'd nod along while my stomach twisted into knots. 2 weeks in, he reached across the table and grabbed my hand, said he didn't know how he'd survive this without me. I saw Jake in his face, the same jawline, the same way his mouth quirked when he was vulnerable, and I let him kiss me in the parking lot. It felt like penance and resurrection at once. That first time in his apartment, I kept my eyes closed so I wouldn't have to see the photos of Jake on the walls. Ben whispered that I was saving him, and I let him believe it. I told myself I was giving him comfort, that this was altruism in its messiest form. But the truth I wouldn't admit then was that every time he touched me, I was rewriting the ending. If I could make Jake's brother happy, maybe I could erase the fact that I'd been the reason Jake got in his car that night. My phone buzzed that night with Chloe's name, and I stared at the screen until it went dark. She'd been asking why I'd been distant, and I'd been telling her work was overwhelming. The lie tasted metallic. I knew she'd see right through it if she heard my voice. The 3rd week, Ben tried to introduce me to his parents as his girlfriend, and I panicked so hard I almost vomited in their pristine bathroom. I told him I needed time, that grief was complicated, and he apologized with such earnestness I wanted to scream. That's when I started keeping a list of excuses on my phone, work deadlines, family emergencies, a fictional book club, so I could space out our meetings. I was already trying to find the exit while clutching the door shut. By the 2-month mark, I'd perfected the art of strategic absence. I'd let him text 3 times before responding, claimed I was swamped with projects, and limited our nights together to when I knew he'd be too exhausted for conversation. He'd fall asleep with his head on my lap, and I'd sit there calculating how much longer I could maintain this performance. Chloe kept pushing for dinner, saying she missed me, and I'd deflect with promises I had no intention of keeping. The crack in my armor came at Jake's birthday, what would have been his 29th. Ben wanted to visit the gravesite together, to finally introduce me properly to his family, and I broke down in my car beforehand. Not because of Jake, but because I realized I'd been counting the days until Ben would be healed enough for me to leave. I was measuring his grief in units of my own convenience, and that calculus felt monstrous. I told Chloe everything that night, or at least the version I could stomach. I said I'd been seeing Ben, that it started as support, but I felt trapped. She poured us wine and said, "You're not his therapist, Myra. You're allowed to walk away." But when I opened my mouth to confess the pity part, that I'd never actually wanted him, just wanted to stop feeling like Jake's murderer, the words solidified in my throat. So I nodded, let her believe I was the victim of my own good intentions, and swallowed the real truth like broken glass. Ben surprised me the next day with a key to his apartment, said he wanted me to know I belonged there. The key weighed nothing, but it felt like an anchor dragging me to the ocean floor. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and slipped it into my pocket where it burned against my hip. Later that afternoon, I used it to leave a letter on his kitchen counter, a letter I never let him find, where I wrote all the things I couldn't say. I threw it away 3 blocks from his building, but the act of writing it felt like confession enough. Chloe found me crying at work, mascara smeared like war paint, and I almost told her. She hugged me, stroked my hair, and whispered that Ben was lucky to have me. The irony was so thick I choked on it. I'd become a saint in her eyes for sacrificing my own happiness to shepherd a grieving man, and the performance was so convincing I almost believed it myself. The moment everything shattered was ordinary. Ben made pancakes, the same 2 a.m. ritual Jake had, and I watched him flip them with the same wrist flick, the same concentration tongue-out thing, and I felt nothing. Not comfort, not guilt, just this overwhelming exhaustion at the theater of it all. He caught me staring, smiled that hopeful, wrecked smile, and I heard myself say, "I need to tell you something." His face went still, pancake mid-flip, and I could see him bracing for impact. I told him I'd never loved him, that I'd started this because I couldn't watch him suffer, but the pity had curdled into resentment. I used those exact words. This was never real, Ben. I was just trying to be kind. The silence afterward was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming its mechanical judgment. He didn't yell. He set down the spatula, wiped his hands on a towel that had been Jake's favorite, and said, "Don't bother." Just 2 words, flat and final. I packed my things while he stood at the window, his back to me, shoulders rigid with something that looked less like grief and more like fury. I left the key on the counter, walked 3 blocks, and realized I'd forgotten my favorite sweatshirt. When I went back, the door was unlocked and I heard voices. Chloe was there, her laughter floating through the crack in the door like a knife. I stood frozen on the welcome mat, listening to them talk about how messed up I was, how I'd used him, and then I heard her say, "She doesn't deserve you." The betrayal was so sharp it felt like a physical wound. I'd confided in her 12 hours ago, and now she was inside his apartment, inside the space I'd just vacated. I left before I could see anything, but my imagination supplied the rest. The way they'd look at each other with shared understanding, how easy it would be for her to touch his arm in comfort that wasn't pity. By midnight, my phone was blowing up with texts from mutual friends asking if I'd seen Chloe's story. She posted a photo of 2 wine glasses on a balcony I recognized as Ben's, captioned, "Sometimes the best therapy is right in front of you." I called her 17 times. She answered on the 18th, her voice sleepy and unbothered. "What's wrong?" she asked, like she didn't know. I screamed that she was a backstabbing bitch, that she'd weaponized my confessions, and she waited until I ran out of breath. Then she said, "You told me you didn't want him. You said it was pity. So why do you care?" The question landed like a gut punch. I cared because she'd taken the one thing I'd convinced myself was altruism and turned it into something transactional. She'd given Ben the validation I couldn't, and in doing so, she'd exposed my entire performance as a selfish lie. Ben texted me at 3 a.m., "You don't get to be angry. You said don't bother, so I didn't." I typed and deleted 100 responses. I wanted to tell him he was right, that I'd forfeited any claim to hurt, but my fingers kept hovering over the keys because the truth was messier than either of us knew. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. Jake's grave was covered in fresh flowers, Ben's doing, always Ben's doing, and I sat on the grass, waiting for some sense of closure. Instead, I remembered the last thing Jake said to me, the thing I'd buried under layers of self-pity: "I know you're fucking someone else. I heard you on the phone last night." He'd been right, but not in the way he thought. I'd been talking to his brother about his birthday present, planning a surprise, but Jake had twisted it into betrayal. He got in his car, tires squealing, and I didn't call him back because I was angry at his accusation. The voicemail he left before the crash was still saved on my phone. I hadn't listened to it in months, but sitting on his grave, I pressed play. His voice was slurred, not with alcohol but with rage. "You win, Myra. You and Ben can have each other." He'd known. Somehow, he'd known about my connection to his brother even before I did. I played it 17 times, each repetition etching the words deeper into my skull. Ben had never mentioned a voicemail, never hinted that Jake knew anything. But the timestamp was clear: 11:47 p.m., 3 minutes before the crash that folded his car around a tree. I'd been the last person he called, me, and then presumably no one, because he was gone. Chloe showed up at my apartment that afternoon, her face a mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk," she said, and I let her in because I was still numb. She perched on my couch, the one we'd picked out together sophomore year of college, and told me she and Ben had connected over their shared pain. "It just happened," she whispered, like that excused it. "He needed someone who actually wanted to be there." I asked her to leave, and when she refused, I told her the truth about Jake. Not the whole truth, but enough that he'd called me before he died, that he'd known about Ben and me, that his last words were an accusation. Her face went through 3 shades of pale and she stood, backing toward the door. "You told me you were just being kind," she said. "You said it was pity, but you were sleeping with him before Jake died, weren't you?" I didn't answer. The silence was louder than any confession. Ben called as Chloe was leaving, her tires screeching like Jake's had. His voice was different, cold, detached. You need to come get your things, I boxed them up. I drove to his apartment with my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. The box was waiting by his door, a post-it note stuck to the top. I should have known when I saw how you looked at his photos. You were always waiting for him to walk through the door. I didn't take the box. I left it there, a monument to my cowardice, and I drove to the one place I knew no one would find me, the diner where it started. The waitress recognized me, asked where my boyfriend was, and I ordered coffee that tasted like burnt regret. My phone was a constant vibration of texts I didn't read, calls I didn't answer. The voicemail from Jake became my obsession. I listened to it before bed, first thing in the morning, in the bathroom at work. Each time, I heard something new, a catch in his voice, a background noise that might have been a horn. I started researching the accident report, pulling up old news articles, trying to piece together the timeline. Jake had been at a bar before the crash, had argued with someone. The someone was me. I'd been so focused on my own guilt about Ben that I'd forgotten the foundation it was built on. Jake's death wasn't random. It was the direct result of our fight, my denial, his rage. And I'd used that death as an excuse to crawl into his brother's bed. Chloe posted another photo, this one of her and Ben at a concert, his arm around her waist, faces blurred by stage lights but clearly happy. The caption was a lyric from a song I'd played for Jake, We Were Built to Fall Apart. The message was clear. She'd taken everything. My mother called, concerned about my breakup, and I lied so smoothly it scared me. I told her Ben and I had grown apart, that I was focusing on myself. She bought it, which meant I'd become an expert at performing normalcy while my insides rotted. The truth I'd been avoiding finally crashed through at 2 a.m., sitting in my car outside Ben's building. I'd been playing the voicemail again, and this time I heard it, really heard it. In the background, just before the line went dead, was a voice, female, laughing. I'd always assumed it was the radio, but it was too specific, too familiar. It was my voice. Memory is a tricky thing. It buries what it can't handle. But sitting there, engine idling, I remembered. I'd called him back. I'd called him back at 11:46, told him he was being paranoid, that he needed to calm down. I'd been annoyed, not concerned. I'd laughed this brittle, frustrated sound when he accused me of sleeping with Ben. You're being ridiculous, I said. Your brother is just a friend. And then I'd hung up. The last thing Jake heard from me was dismissal, and the last thing I'd heard from him was the roar of an engine and then silence. I'd killed him, not with a car but with words and timing and pride, and I'd spent 9 months trying to bury that truth under someone else's grief. Ben's text came at 3:17 a.m. Chloe told me you were sleeping with Jake before he died. She showed me texts. Is it true? I didn't ask what texts. I knew Chloe well enough to know she'd fabricate evidence if it meant winning. But the real joke was that she didn't need to fabricate anything. She just didn't know the whole picture. I typed out the truth not before, but I was talking to him when he crashed. We fought. He thought I was sleeping with you. He was right, just not how he thought. I hit send before I could delete it, and then I waited. Ben called immediately, his voice broken in a different way now. You told me it was pity. You said you were being kind, but you were using me to punish yourself for killing him. The accusation was so accurate it stole my breath. I tried to explain about the surprise party, about how I'd been planning his birthday with Ben, but the words sounded like excuses even to me. He hung up, and I sat in the dark, finally seeing the full shape of my destruction. I told myself I was being noble, sleeping with Ben out of pity. But I'd been sleeping with my dead lover's brother out of guilt, and I'd told him it was pity, which somehow made it worse. Because pity implies superiority, a condescension. I'd made him feel small even in my confession. Chloe posted her final betrayal at sunrise, a screenshot of my text to her, the one where I said it was pity sex, captioned, "This is what she really thinks of people who love her." The comments section exploded. People I'd known for years weighed in, calling me a monster, a narcissist, a user. Ben liked the post. My phone became a weapon against me, every notification a new cut. I turned it off, drove to the cemetery, and sat on Jake's grave for 6 hours. I told him everything about Ben, about the pity, about how I'd let his brother believe he was being saved when he was really being punished for something that wasn't his fault. The wind carried my words away, which was probably for the best. When I got home, there was a letter slipped under my door. No name, but I recognized Ben's handwriting. I don't know which is worse, it read, that you slept with me because you felt sorry for me or that you slept with me because you killed him. Either way, you were never seeing me. You were seeing Jake's ghost, and I was just the closest vessel. He was right. I'd been having sex with a ghost story, and I'd made him the unwilling participant. The fallout was immediate and nuclear. My job put me on leave pending investigation into conduct unbecoming because Chloe had emailed HR screenshots of my manipulative behavior. My landlord asked me to consider moving because other tenants had complained about the drama. My mother stopped calling. I spent 3 weeks in my apartment, blinds drawn, surviving on delivery food, and the voicemail that had become my only companion. I listened to Jake's final words until I could recite them in my sleep, until the female laugh in the background sounded like my own personal haunting. The trigger for finally telling this story was finding the engagement ring. It had fallen behind my dresser, a simple silver band I'd bought for Jake 2 days before he died. I'd planned to propose on his birthday, to make up for our constant fighting, to prove I wasn't sleeping with Ben. The receipt was still in the box November 15th, 3 days before the crash. I'd been so focused on the aftermath I'd forgotten the beginning. I wasn't just the villain in Ben's story, I was the villain in Jake's, too. The girl who was never trustworthy, who made him die angry, who then crawled into his brother's bed to reenact a redemption arc that only existed in my head. Ben and Chloe are still together, apparently happy. She got what she wanted, he got someone who sees him, and I got what I deserved. But here's the thing that haunts me at 4 a.m. when I told Ben it was pity, I was telling the truth. I pitied him because he was alive and Jake was. I pitied him because he got to keep breathing while I carried the weight of a death. I pitied him because he loved me, and I was too broken to love him back. But pity is just another word for cruelty when it's dressed up as kindness. And I was cruel to everyone, Jake, Ben, Chloe, myself. The ring sits on my nightstand now, a reminder that the person I was going to build a life with is dead, and the person I tried to build a life on top of is gone, too. I'm telling this because yesterday Chloe posted a photo of her and Ben at the diner where we started. He's smiling, really smiling, and she captioned it, New Beginnings. And I realized the story they're telling leaves me as the monster, which is fair. But it also leaves out that I was a monster who loved someone enough to destroy everything else, and maybe that's not a redemption arc, but it's the truth. The uncomfortable, unflinching truth is that I killed one brother with words and used the other's grief as a life raft, and now I'm drowning in the shallow end of a pool I filled myself. Judge me however you need to, but know that pity sex wasn't the worst thing I did. It was just the first honest thing I said in 9 months of lies.